back to the betrayal of Israel and the gateway back to the Holocaust. This is the YAHOWAH blog, and I am your host, Craig Winn. I have been explaining for 10 or 15 years now that the hideous notion of a land for peace deal with Muslims called the two-state solution, the creation of a Palestinian state, was not only inevitable, but that it would occur prior to Shabat, 22 May 2026, because the prophets have spoken of it. And as I address this and continue to present this gateway back to the Holocaust, because that's going to be the result, it is important to state emphatically that Palestine is nothing more than a Marxist Muslim ploy resurrected in the 1960s by the Muslim Brotherhood and the KGB for the express purpose of perpetrating genocide on Jews and obliterating Israel. It was originally conceived by Hadrian in 133 CE, after this vicious and savage Roman emperor ransacked Israel, crucified hundreds of thousands of Jews, completely destroyed Jerusalem, with the intent of turning the Temple Mount into a shrine to himself as a god, and to forever discourage Jews from recognizing Judea as their homeland again, because he, Hadrian, and Rome were way too savage to allow that to happen. That is where the myth of a Palestine began, and it was resurrected by Yasser Arafat, his sponsor at the time, Nasser, of Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood, and the KGB, the Marxists in Russia. And the Marxists in Russia were involved because they were the arms merchants to the Egyptians at the time, and they were not selling arms to Israel. America was. And so this was the perfect use of communist propaganda. And this is really where that Marxist Muslim alliance all began, and it's still galvanized around the obliteration of Israel. It's all still a blend of outright lies, shaming the victims of genocide by calling them the perpetrators of genocide, the very thing that caused the Marxist to kill the two Jews who were embassy staff in Washington 2 nights ago. He was a Marxist. Marxists and Muslims have formed the most diabolical, deadly, hypocritical, ignorant, irrational, and immoral alliance in the history of humankind. And it all began with this germ, this terrorist tactic to annihilate God's people through the myth of Palestine. And now it is about to metastasize and actually become a terrorist state of Islam. As we speak, Donald Trump has been bribed by Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and particularly MBS of Saudi Arabia. And as part of a deal to maintain the status of the petrodollar and to create the illusion of U.S. solvency, even in the midst of all of the calamity that he is causing worldwide, Donald Trump has agreed to sacrifice Israel, the very heart of Israel, to the Muslims who have sought the demise of Jews for 14 centuries, to reward the very Islamic jihadists that perpetrated the most heinous, savage, brutal, immoral act since the Holocaust, and in many ways worse than the Holocaust, not in overall numbers, but in savagery. To reward them with the state, to give them exactly what they sought when conducting Alaska flood. It is the most reprehensible betrayal of morality the planet has ever witnessed. And it is being embraced by the right and the left, the secular and the religious. It causes my stomach to churn that progressives could be this stupid and that Muslims could be this vile and that the world could be so easily bribed, as is the case with America's universities, its media, both on the right and on the left, by the Bank of Islamic Terror in Qatar, and that the United States would do exactly as the prophets had foretold, be in the center of it all in the betrayal of Israel. I am not new to this story. I began explaining that this would occur because it was foretold in the prophets 15 years ago. And when Donald Trump was elected in November, I explained to all who would listen boldly and bluntly that he was the next Neville Chamberlain, and that Trump's Czechoslovakia would be Israel. His Nazis would be Muslims. His Hitler would be MBS. And that the betrayal of Israel as a result, rather than achieving peace in our time, would lead to world war, the death of millions of Jews, and billions of others as the entire world is engulfed in the resulting chaos. This is what the prophets predicted and foretold. They have never been wrong. And it's why I have stated it boldly and bluntly. And now what we are doing is we're reviewing one of the prophecies, I think the most descriptive, bold, blunt, irrefutable, that affirms that this is precisely what we're witnessing, and that it will occur prior to the fulfillment of Shabat, the 22nd of May, 2026, that begins the time of Jacob's troubles on sevens, 7 years before the Messiah Dode, the Son of God and our King, return with Yahowah on Yom Kippurim, and this horrible period comes to a close. The good news is that a remnant of Israel will prevail. The earth will be restored. The bad news is that billions are going to die in the process. So what we have read thus far in Yeshaya, Isaiah, is that there will be a very destructive force in and around Damascus, and that much of the city and those surrounding it will be a tumbled mess of twisted ruins, which is precisely what has happened. And that the government out of Damascus will fall, which is what happened a matter of months ago. And that in its place, terrorists will rise, which is exactly what we have witnessed as al-Jilani of the Islamic State now controls Syria. And that these terrorists will unite with others, and that they will raise havoc in places like Jordan, Lebanon, and of course in Syria and that the result will be Israel put in a position where it needs to respond, and there will be additional carnage in Ephraim, northern Israel, and also in Syria. And that these events, which we have all witnessed happen already, just in the last matter of months, lead to the forfeiture of the heart of Israel. The prophet says that the land of Israel will be thinned at the waist, such that the nation is no longer defensible, and that with its heart cut out of it, as a result of the machinations of world leaders who are all disingenuous, according to the prophet, Israel is going to endure a hellish time. That is where we are currently in the prophecy. And let's be clear, this prophecy, which was once improbable to the point of seeming impossible when it was revealed 2,700 years ago, is now so inevitable, we're witnessing it materialize before our eyes. It is so precise that to any informed and rational individual, Yahweh has used past and future history to prove his existence and his authorship of the text we are reading and reciting in Yeshaya, Isaiah. But we have just begun. God's going to continue to inform his creation because, in spite of our poor choices, he remains desirous of us getting to know him, of us coming to trust and rely upon him, and of us developing an ongoing relationship with him, particularly his people. He wants to restore Israel. And it's going to happen at the nick of time as the world is about to destroy the planet. So that Israelis and Jews are not taken by surprise, so that no one is left behind without fair warning, we are told that the narrowing of Israel occurs in conjunction with the harvest of standing grain, which is Shabuah. This reaping of first fruits will then be followed by a gleaning of olives on the opposite end of the time of Jacob's troubles. And that is why we are pondering the implications of this portion of Yeshaya. The great prophet has set the stage not only for the Shabuah and Towrah harvest as the bookends of the time of Jacob's troubles, but the most important event in modern history, the betrayal of Israel to the despots of a demonic death cult, and the ensuing world war that will be the most egregious in human history. Inspired by Yahweh, Yeshaya penned 2,700 years ago. Then it will be like the gathering in and the receiving, asaf, like joining together and bringing in, collecting and assembling by removing by way of an ingathering and withdrawing through guidance of a harvest. Katsir. Katsir is a reaping of fruit from the chaff in the proper season. It is to cut away the branch so as to remove it from a short but extremely vexing time of extreme grief. This is a harvest of standing grain, that which is upright and firmly rooted, with the ability to stand up and rise from to take a stand, to affirm, to validate, and establish, being upright, ratified, and confirmed. And his Zeroah, the one who is cultivating the seeds sown for this harvest, such that it is fruitful and productive. Zeroah, the strong arm, leading his flock, the one with the ability to accomplish what is required to be productive and fruitful, the one who sows the seeds of new life and anticipation of a bountiful harvest. It is from Zerah, sowing the seeds which take root and grow, producing offspring. It is a title that is afforded to three men: Moshe, Dod, and Yada. His Zeroah will reap the harvest with unfolding implications, Katsir. He will continually gather that which has taken root and grown, reaping that which is productive, separating the fruit from the chaff at the proper time. This of first fruits, forming an overflowing torrent, moving swiftly from one place to another in linear fashion as a result of the stem off of the main branch. Shibolim, of grain, of fruit, on upright stalks, outstretched branches found flowing in great abundance from Shobel and Shiblet, the flowing hem of a skirt and the river moving quickly as flowing from one place to another without turning, straightforward in linear fashion, glistening all the way. In addition, there will be a time certain that which is similar to a gleaning of what is left and a final collection and a last ingathering, a lakot, a rapid gathering up of a remnant, quickly removing all or most of the remaining harvest. Speaking of a numerically insignificant ingathering compared to a main katsir, and implying that a small amount is collected in relation to the energy that is expended to grasp hold of them and to withdraw them one final time. Of first fruits, flowing from one place to another in linear fashion. In the profound depths of Raphaim, where the sick have been healed and the defective have been restored, while the feeble falter and the souls of the dead remain. Yashayah, freedom and deliverance are from Yahowah. This location, which is called in the profound depths of Raphaim, it is from the vast and open places where the depressed have been healed by the physician, from Rapha, a place where the impaired have been restored to health, and Rapha, where the feeble still falter and are left to descend from a higher place to a more diminished status as a result of being lazy, limp, habitually refusing to exert the effort required to prevail. Raphaim is a broad and open valley 2 miles west-southwest of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. I realize that what I have just shared is a lot to process, particularly if you have not been on this journey with us, because every word is filled with import. And I'm going to share my thoughts on it, and we're going to go back to this testimony to go back over it so that you understand exactly what God is saying at this time, because it is a matter of life and death. But before we do, let's just be clear about the main point. This thinning of Israel at the waist so that the nation becomes indefensible, that follows the fall of the government out of Syria and the rise of a terrorist regime that we have already witnessed, occurs before this Shabuah harvest, which has just been described. And the Shabuah harvest, meaning sevens, occurs 7 years before year 6000 when the Messiah, Dod, our King and Savior, returns with YAHOWAH, which is in year 2033. And that means that Shabuah, that we're speaking of, is the one celebrated on the Shabat of May 22nd, 2026. That is our timeline. We are 12 months away from that moment. That is why we know what is going to occur, the thinning of Israel by the imposition of the two-state solution, and when it's going to occur. And later in the 18th chapter, Yashaya Isaiah, inspired by Yahweh, is going to tell us who is the one who perpetrates this great calamity, making Israel indefensible. So this pronouncement, when combined with the next, is the single most important statement any prophet has revealed pertaining to you, if you're listening to me now, and to our relationship together at this time. So let's make certain that we appreciate the context and the content of what was just revealed. Based upon what Yahweh just said, and soon will say, we can deduce that Muslims are going to behave badly in and around Damascus, even as Shia battle Sunni for supremacy and Bashar al-Assad provokes retaliatory responses. The prophecy states that the Bashar al-Assad government will fall and that great damage will have been done to Damascus during the overall process of this terrorist fight for control of the country, which is exactly what we have witnessed. Now, the obvious reason will be for Israel to respond is to remove the stockpile of rockets that Iran has positioned here, as well as the Assad war machine that was aimed at Israel, so that the Islamic State terrorists that have risen to power in Syria don't deploy these weapons of war to harm God's people. And what we have witnessed is the continued destruction of Damascus. Ultimately, Damascus is going to end up looking a whole lot like Gaza, which, if you look at the neighborhoods that were bombed in the prelude to this in Damascus, and then those on the path south from where al-Jilani began into Damascus, it is images that look just like Gaza. I think I had shared with you that there were, by satellite images, 106,000 buildings that were destroyed, with 26,000 of them in Damascus, a twisted heap of rubble, just as the prophet explained. And as the prophet explained, the Syrian government has now fallen. In fact, it's interesting here to speak about the nature of prophecy. I last edited this text that I'm sharing with you about a year and a half ago. And at that time, I had to write it at, in the ensuing events, the Syrian government will fall, leaving it like Libya, awash in terrorists, is what I wrote, because that's what the prophet said was going to happen. Now I have to speak of that in the past tense because it has happened. But that's the nature of prophecy. When God says something's going to happen, it will happen. It has happened exactly as he described it. I then wrote, in an inane attempt to stop the rapid escalation of world conflict, that war will be ignited by rewarding the Muslim terrorists with an Islamic State carved out of the heart of Israel. Now, if I were delivering this a matter of 2 weeks from now, I would have to render that in past tense too. Saudi Arabia, having now bribed Donald Trump and derived a series of concessions from Donald Trump as a result of Trump needing desperately Saudi Arabia to retain the petrodollar status because of the faltering nature of the U.S. currency as the world's reserve currency and the fragile nature of a fiat currency with a nation that has $40 trillion in debt and cannot service it in any other way than the illusion of money, which is only possible with reserve currency status. Trump was over a barrel, and he made no attempt to do the right thing, but simply capitulated and then was bribed into compliance so that MBS is pulling his strings. And what MBS wanted not only was nuclear technology, which he got, advanced artificial intelligence capability to fill in what Muslims lack, which he got, $150 billion of weapons from America, which he is receiving. But he wanted to be the one who actually delivers the final blow to Israel. And that final blow to Israel comes by way of establishing a terrorist state, a Palestinian state, malcontent and murderous Muslims right in the heart of Israel, armed to the teeth and motivated for a singular cause, to end the two-state solution with the imposition of one Islamic state, all the way from the borders of India all the way to Morocco. And that is what we're witnessing. The Muslim terrorists who perpetrated 10/7 are being rewarded with an Islamic state carved right out of Israel. And the consequence of offering a terrorist death cult, the land of Judea and Samaria, even portions of Jerusalem for purposes of peace, is that more terrorism, more ruthless, violent terrorism, and death on an unimaginable scale will ensue. So to keep his family safe, Yahowah will be working with his third and final Zeroah to withdraw the covenant children in an asaf, an ingathering of ketzir, a harvest of kama, of standing grain on Shabuah. Now we know that this portion of the prophecy describing what will transpire on Shabuah is true, because in the Torah, Moshe reported, you should consistently recount the written documentation communicated on how to relate to 7 and the oath of Shabuah, 7s, as the promise of the Shabbat, as it pertains to you, beginning from the separation by bringing a sickle, an implement for liberating, separating, gathering, and harvesting, to the kama, the standing grain, that which is upright and firmly rooted, from kum, to stand, to rise, to be ratified, and be confirmed. Begin to initiate the process of the written word regarding 7 promises and Shabbats. Dabarim, Deuteronomy 16:9, it's words. Then you should act upon and engage in the festival feast of Shabuah, of 7s, Shabbats, and the promises, to approach Yahowah, your God, with an appropriate and affordable voluntary offering of one's initiative, of your hand, which demonstrates the way to the benefit of the relationship, so that you can actually give this when compared to how in this relationship, Yahowah, your God, continues to bless and adore you. Dabarim 16:10. You can genuinely rejoice and be glad in the presence of Yahowah, your God, you and your sons and daughters, and your male and female workers. Those who benefit from the relationship are who are in your communities, those of different ethnicities and cultures, the orphan, and those who are lonely, the widow and the forsaken, wanting to be led such that she is on the correct path. In your midst, standing up at the place which to show the way to receive the benefits of the relationship, Yahweh your God chooses for his personal and proper name to dwell and to reside. Dabadim words, Deuteronomy 16:11. Therefore, it can be stated with absolute certainty that Chag Shabuah is a time to reciprocate Yahweh's love. It is a time to separate the Kama, the standing grain, from the earth. Those souls who are described as standing upright so that they are not bowed down, they are established, confirmed, and ready to rise. Therefore, during Shabuah, the covenant family, comprising men and women of many ethnicities and different situations, having been led along the correct path, will be overjoyed when entering Yahweh's presence and removed from this cesspool of human malfeasance. Not wanting his covenant family to be caught up in the carnage, Yashayah has begun to describe at this time. He says that Yahweh will institute the Shabuah Katsir of Kameh, of standing grain. Therefore, in this context, in the current horrible onslaught of Islamic progressive assaults on Jews and Israel, it's all going to go awry. And as I would have written and did a matter of 9 to 12 months ago, that Damascus and Syria, the governments would fall, they now have. And responding irrationally to Islamic provocation, Western progressives will force Israel to trade its heartland for promises of peace. We're witnessing that in today's newspapers. This grotesquely immoral stupidity is going to backfire, and it's going to usher in the time of Israel's troubles with massacres far worse than were experienced on October 7th of 23. To distinguish the initial harvest, the Bokurim, firstborn children, in gathering is comprised of budding barley on Bokurim. This occurs early in the spring during the second week of Abib. And by contrast, the Shabuah Sevens harvest is of grain that is comprised of varieties of wheat. So we know this is because, well, we know that that is the case, that it is wheat and a different time for this harvest because Yahweh said so. He said, you should act to capitalize upon expending the considerable effort needed to accomplish the purpose of the celebratory festival feast of Shabuah, the promise of the Shabbat and 7, for you all to approach as a Bokurim, a first fruits katsir, harvest, of chittim, of wheats, of mature and valued grains known for projecting themselves, standing up prominently as a chag celebration of the asif ingathering at the turning point of the end, so that you change. Shemoth names Exodus 34:22. Now the sickle is brought to wheat in May, which is when Shabuah is observed. And since the time of change at the outset of Yaakov's troubles begins on Shabuah, 7 years prior to it concluding with Dod's arrival on Kippurim, the date is set, and we know it to be the Shabat of May 22nd, 2026, when the Shabuah, 7 years prior to the end of the time of Jacob's troubles, is celebrated with the great homecoming of Dod and Yahowah. Now we should note, Shabuah does not happen on its own. It is the product of considerable effort. This is why the final Zeroah and the covenant family are devoted to cultivating this katsir, this harvest, and asif, ingathering of chittim, varieties of wheat, as we approach the takupah, this turning point in time at the end. The chittim represents different ethnicities, including both Yehudim and Goyim. This is further affirmed by the 2 loaves of bread, which are raised and offered to Yahweh on Shabuah. And the takupah is distinguished as Eth Yaakov Sar, the time of Jacob's troubles, the 7 years prior to our king's return. Just as a program note, for those who may be wondering but haven't looked it up, this year, the final Shabuah prior to the harvest of Shabuah will transpire on the first day of June. It actually could be celebrated on the second day of June, which is the day that the United Nations will begin the series of meetings for the purpose of establishing a Palestinian state to destroy Israel. But I'm going to be celebrating it on the 1st of June because that is consistent with the time that I began Passover, so that we could have our Passover meal during our celebration of family hour on a Friday evening, the beginning of a Shabbat. So June 1st this year. Next year, May 22nd. It's also important to notice that since Shabuah is an ingathering of Bokurim, of firstborn children, Dod made it possible by fulfilling Pesach, Matzah, and Bokurim. And while one thing should have led to the other, because no one should have been unaware of what the Messiah and Son of God has done as the ultimate Zeroah, the sacrificial lamb, there would have been no one to harvest God's standing grain had it not been for the contribution of Yada Yahowah. In this way, the 3 Zeroah work together for the same result. And speaking of Yada Yahowah, yesterday we branched out and created the Yada Yahowah group on Facebook. We did so because of the limit of 5,000 friends on a Facebook account, and we were fast approaching that number, even though we've been on Facebook a matter of, since really January of this year. And what we have noticed there is a celebration of the purpose of Yada Yahowah, which is members of the covenant family are sharing their story with one another, and we're all talking about how we came to know Yahweh, how we came to be part of the covenant, why we care so deeply about God's people at this time, and the effort we're making so that others might Yada Yahowah. If you haven't yet been to the Yada Yahowah group on Facebook, I would strongly encourage that you go there. I would also ask that you join us on the Craig Winn Facebook account, because that is where we first release the most important news, where we live stream these shows. And for those who are really dedicated to God's people, the ultimate war against the forces of evil, this Marxist Muslim alliance that seeks the genocide of God's people, it takes place on X. And X is absolutely culpable in the destruction of Israel, as is Donald Trump, as are Europeans, as are Muslims, particularly Saudi Arabia and Qatar. So please join us on X, on YouTube, on Facebook, and in the Yada Yahowah group. They all serve one purpose. And while it is wonderful that we have a place to come together and to share, and I would strongly encourage this, our primary purpose is to grow so that we can be strong in our outreach to help God, help his people survive through this time. Shavuot, as the second of three Asaph in gatherings, will be the largest and most joyous of these Katsir harvests. According to Yeshayah, who has it on really good authority, the reason for the productive harvest is because of the Zeroah. He has been put in place by Yahweh to cultivate and to reap the result. And since the third Zeroah and the Choder are one and the same, both described vividly by Yeshayah as inspired by Yahweh, we gain an appreciation of his purpose in these words. And speaking of the Zeroah, it is feminine as a title, and yet it is applied to three men: Moshe, the liberator and Torah teacher; Dod, who has, too many accolades to list; and Yada, whom Yahweh identifies through a plethora of descriptive metaphors. Moshe was the strong arm of God who, as a shepherd, led the flock away from slavery, oppression, religion, politics, and the caste system. Dod was the strong ram and the sacrificial lamb. And Yada is the one cultivating the seeds Moshe and Dod have sown to produce a fruitful harvest for them. The reason for acknowledging that Zeroah is a feminine title applied to three men of the most, three of the most important men in Yahweh's story, along with many other titles, both masculine and feminine, at this time is because Yeshayah revealed that the Zeroah will be responsible for the Shabuah Katsir harvest and the Teruah Lakat gleaning, and the Olela, who are deliberately left behind. And this means that Yeshayah continues to be a textbook on proper chodering. In addition to how to respond, should you be listening, and hopefully you are, to the Zeroah. It isn't until receptive souls properly identify the Zeroah and follow his guidance that they can avail themselves of these opportunities. And Yeshayah 17:5, in that prophecy that we are reviewing, it leads to one of the most provocative feminine roles ever assigned to a man. And so Isaiah and I want you to be properly prepared, since the survival of the remnant of Israel depends on their response to where all of this leads. And of course, he is speaking of the sacrifice of the Adamah Parah. Returning to Shabuah for the moment, it is as I have previously suggested. Dod is responsible for the Bakurim ingathering, and Yada has been asked to cultivate the Shabuah harvest of standing grain based upon what his king has achieved. And because we know that Eliah will be joining the Zeroah in advance of Teruah, the great prophet will be tasked with the nearly impossible, garnering Yisrael's attention such that they trade religion and politics for a relationship with Yahweh, and so that they listen to the Zeroah. This final and last opportunity will be a life and death choice. The time certain for the Chag Shabua celebration of 7 sevens, the Katsir harvest and Asaph ingathering of Chittim wheat varieties as Chama, standing grain comprised of Bukurim, firstborn children. It's going to occur on the Shabat of May 22nd, 2026. This is the Takupah, the turning point in time at the end. It is concurrent with the commencement of Eth Yaakov Sar, the time of Israel's troubles, beginning the 7 years before Yahweh and Dod arrive on Yom Kippurim, the day of reconciliations at sunset in Jerusalem, the source of guidance on reconciliation, October 2nd, 2033, which is year 6000 Yah. While the Zerah will accompany those being withdrawn from Ha-Eretz, the earth, to enter Yahweh's presence in Shamaim, in the spiritual realm of the heavens, his mission will not be over. He is going to return on or before the 1st of Abib in year 5997, April 4th, 2030. It's a Thursday, when the first crescent of a renewed light is reflected from the sun onto the moon, beginning the service of the moon's reflected light of the sun, the greater luminary, being reflected through the lesser luminary. This will be 46 months after the Shabua harvest and 1,290 days, representing 42 months or 3.5 years of desolating abominations prior to the conclusion of the 8th day of Sukkah in year 6000 Yah. April. Habib 1st, which is 4/4/2030, is the same day that the corporeal manifestation of Satan, the Torahless one, is going to arrive to rally the political and religious in Jerusalem. He will be known, of course, before this time, probably becoming known 3.5 years before this in the spring of 2026. And many will, no doubt, believe that he is their Messiah. There are people throughout Israel and the world, certainly the MAGAs, that see Donald Trump as the Messiah, and yet he's the one selling out Israel. Rather than saving Israel, he's the one abandoning, betraying Israel. People are so easily confused these days because so few think. They believe, whether it's for politics or their religion or their conspiracy, which typically are equally false. This timing is important, not only because it coincides with what Gabriel is God's most courageous and capable man, as in David, as he reported to Daniel, but it also means that Yada and Elia will have been back 3 years when Yada is sacrificed and burned for the benefit of the surviving remnant of Yisrael. This is the sacrifice of the red heifer. This serves as the fulfillment of a prophecy at the inception of the Bereth covenant that will be complete as the implications of Yeshayah's prophecy play out. Now, recognizing this, the Teruah Lakat gleaning will be the last ride off of the planet prior to the Messiah's Kippurim return. The reason that it takes place the evening before the sacrifice of the red heifer is that from the time of the Shabua harvest to the time of Teruah, over that 7 years, from May 22nd, 2026 to the 23rd, the evening of the 23rd of September, 2033, There will be numerous Yehudim and Israelites that return to Yahweh, embrace Yahweh's name, accept the terms and conditions of the covenant, attend the Moed Mikre, and receive the benefits. And in so doing, those individuals are now immortal. They are God's eternal family. They have been enriched and empowered by Yahweh. They have been perfected and made immortal. And as a result of this, God must remove them at this time so that they might enjoy the benefits of having chosen to be part of the covenant. And that means that 100% of those Israelites who are now part of the mortal remnant who remain in Jerusalem, and those who are brought in courtesy of the white spiritual chariot that canvasses the world, as we're told in Zechariah 6, over the 12 hours from sunrise to sunset in Jerusalem on the Shabat, the 24th of September, during the day of Towrah, the day of the herald, to the backdrop of a full solar eclipse. All of them will be mortals. They are the adulterous woman, now prepared to be cleansed so that she can be betrothed to the returning king, Dod. That is what is being described here. That is why there's this series of harvests. One is to keep the covenant family out of this horrible time of Israel's troubles. The second is to reward those who have made the right decision to be part of God's covenant family. And the third is to then prepare this final mortal remnant of Israel for the king's return and the ultimate family reunion. The rapid tertiary ingathering of Israelites and Yehudim will occur during, as I have mentioned, a full solar eclipse on the Shabbat of September 23rd, 2033, with just 10 days remaining before the family reunion. I am laughing because my Labrador, Asher, just walked in for a reunion with me here. She was on the wrong side of a door. And if you know Labradors, they have these big, huge otter tails. And Asher is beating her tail against the desk and against my leg, and it's making quite the racket. So this is what Labradors do. So this is a trilogy, if you will, a tertiary ingathering of Israelites and Yehudim occurring over the course of events, with the final preparation to a solar eclipse on the Shabbat of September 24th of 2033. Just 10 days remaining before the family reunion and homecoming. And these souls will come out of Emek Raphaim, the profound depths where the sick have been healed and the defective have been restored, while the feeble will falter. Their souls of the dead will remain. We discussed in previous programs the effect of, and this would be in Chakma Chodar, of Zechariah 6, of those four chariots, where the red one represents the Adamah Parah, this bloody red man of the earth, who is productive, and the man from Edom, the man dressed in red that saves many. That one stays in Jerusalem, of course. And then there is the black chariot, which is the one now being described, that is for the feeble who falter, who are still too religious and political, conspiratorial to benefit from what the sacrifice of the red heifer will offer. Then there is the white chariot, and its purpose at that time is over 12 hours to gather all of the Israelites not currently in Jerusalem so they can benefit from the events of this day of Towrah, the day of the herald. And then, of course, there's the dappled chariot that takes its time, but it's canvassing the world for Goyim that are neither religious nor political. They're certainly not anti-Semitic. They have done nothing to harm God's people. And those with the best attitudes and with the right attributes and proclivities are going to be brought to be of service during the millennial Shabbat, which will be a pretty spectacular duty for them. And so this is all that is transpiring here, and specifically why Raphaim has been used, because it describes all of this. The valley of Raphaim then is nearby, just 2 miles southwest of the Temple Mount and Jerusalem, which is important in that they're in the midst of this depressing time. Some Israelites will be healed and restored to the extent that they can be. Well, the previous evening they will be withdrawn to heaven, and during this day, the mortal remnant will be brought in to benefit from the sacrifice of the Yada Yahowah. They'll be cleansed by the torrent of water that will be emerging from beneath the Temple Mount, mixed with the ash of the Yada Yahowah, and this purged by the searing flames that Yahweh will ignite. All while those who have come to attack Israel will be incinerated and then washed away by these very same elements. It is a period like none other, the greatest show on earth, the ultimate spectacle whereby the dividing line is finally formed, and you are either eliminated or you move forward in time. So before we move on, it's interesting to note that there were 4 distinct words used to describe these 2 end gatherings: Asaph, Katsir, Katsar, and Lakat. To appreciate why God chose all 4, it is incumbent upon us to search out each word's unique implications. This study begins with Asaph, which is translated as gathering in and receiving. Asaph is a joining together of God and his children, bringing them into his home, and of collecting them by way of an ingathering when withdrawing them, as if another Exodus. And they're brought out of and away from harm through the guidance that God has provided through his Torah. Now, Katsir conveys so much more than harvest. It reveals that the desirable fruit will be reaped from the unwanted chaff, and that this will occur in the proper time or season, pointing out the way to the mikre of Shabuah and Towrah. It is one of Yahweh's favorite metaphors, one that he uses 3 times throughout the presentation of the Moedim, these restoring witnesses to the eternal testimony provided by the annual meetings, to present a picture everyone throughout time would have been able to understand, that of reaping a harvest such that the valued fruit of one's labors are brought into the storehouse, and that which remains is useless is blown away, and it is unattended and unvalued. That's the separating between the two. That's the whole purpose of a harvest, leaving behind the chaff. Additionally, katsir is a noun rather than a verb, and it presents the idea that the branches, under the metaphor for the covenant family, are cut away and set apart from a short but extremely vexing time of grief. This time of Jacob's troubles must be cut short due to the extent of the vexing provocation and uncontrollable rage that we're beginning to witness around the world that is turning so bloody. Katsir portrays a period when rhetoric is especially divisive, and when man's rage is devastating and his wrath grievous. It describes what we're witnessing in the Marxist-Muslim alliance. It presents the last days of institutionalized dominion, this integration of religion and politics, and of the earth as mankind's malfeasance spreads the world over. Then katsar, which is the verbal form of katsir, is correctly rendered as will reap the harvest. It reveals that God will gather and collect, withdrawing those who have been productive and who are useful, who have stayed the course, those he values from his vineyards, his fields and orchards. He will be separating and collecting the fruit of the Zeroah's labors from man's chaff during this time of unbearable grief during the last days. More on this. In the harvest of Katzar, we discover Sar, a word Yahweh selected to convey the nature of Yaakov's Sar, troubles. It is the term he deployed to reveal that Yisrael would be Sar, narrowed and confined and in dire straits, greatly distressed and opposed by enemy forces, caged in, besieged. It also serves as the basis of Mitzrayim, which is the crucibles of political and religious oppression known by most as Egypt. Therefore, these Katzar harvests will occur at the beginning and the end of the time of unbearable grief, when man's chaff is blown away at the time of Yisrael's Sar, troubles. They are the remnant of the previous Exodus, and on this occasion, from a very hostile religious and political world. It's all going to transpire during the last days, coinciding with the outset of Yaakov's Sar, Israel's troubles. Now, in this regard, Kama is revealing because based upon Kum, it confirms that the covenant family is standing tall and firm, standing up so as to be seen and heard against the forces that would harm his people, these progressives serving as the pimps of Islam and on behalf of Muslim genocide against God's people. We are represented by the letters repeated in God's name. These are depicted by someone reaching up to grasp hold of Yahweh's hand as a result of what he and his Zeroah have accomplished. The fourth, but not last harvest, is a lakat. It represents a gleaning, a rapid ingathering of whatever remains valuable to the harvester. Just as the Towrah harvest will concur suddenly, lakat describes the process of quickly removing the remaining harvest. It's got to be that night because the next day there's only the mortal remnant left. So it is a process that occurs very quickly. With a lakat, the numbers are fewer and the effort required to revive the fruit is great, accurately conveying the intensity of the moment just days from the end and the intense work that Elia and Yada will have invested. The first three Mikre were fulfilled one after the other by the ultimate Zeroah, the sacrificial lamb, Dode, 40 Yobel ago in 33 CE, exactly at the moment he predicted he would arrive to do this 700 years prior when speaking to Daniel. So now, on the precipice of year 6000, God is announcing that he will once again honor his promise to fulfill the final four Mikre, Shabuah, in year 5993 which is 2026 CE, followed by Teruah, Kippurim, and Sukkah, one after the other, in year 6000 in 2033. In between these monumental events, the Zeroah is going to be, tasked and busy serving on behalf of his king, with the last Zeroah reflecting the life and the lyrics of the man he is honored to serve. And fortunately, the title Zeroah affirms that he will be productive and fruitful, such that the great homecoming and ultimate family reunion will be celebrated to a full and joyous house. Just how productive remains to be seen as we move from Yeshaya 17:5 to 17:6 and beyond. The prophet will take us to the place I could not have imagined. even though it was boldly scribed in the Torah long ago. Now, finishing our thoughts on Lakot. It depicts a gleaning as a final harvest. This puts the Mikra of Towrah in its rightful place as the last of three ingatherings of saved souls. By calling it a gleaning, God is affirming that the yield will be light and the time frantic, the effort enormous. Now, this is consistent with his written proclamations on the first of the two tablets when he wrote, "Thousands will receive his mercy by observing his covenant's conditions." Thousands amongst billions, my friends, is just 1 in a million. Shibolim, which appears twice in Yashaya 17:5, both in conjunction with the Katsir and the Lakot. Shabuah and Towrah is also an affirmation of Yahweh's plan. It is used to portray the connection between the Katsir of Shabuah and the Lakot of Towrah and the Aktaf of Bekurim, firstborn children, which preceded it during the gleaning 40 Yobel ago in year 4000 Yah. It serves as an allusion to the nature of these first three Mikre, Pesach, Matzah, and Bekurim, which in turn serve to make Shabuah and Towrah possible. And as we know, Dod's fulfillment occurred in the spring during Abib, when the young barley ears are still green and growing at the head of the grain. It was a time when Yah's children should have been receptive to his invitations rather than mature, hardened, and easily crushed. And speaking of crushed, we will soon discover that the Zeroah, under a different descriptive time, or title, I should say, well, he's going to be beaten to death on Towrah. Just, 9 years from now, 8.5 years from now. Then it is Eliah who will plead with Yehudim to be receptive to the Torah again, such that Shibolim, moving in accord with the guidance and teaching that flows out of the Torah, will aid this remaining remnant of Yisrael so that they are prepared for the ensuing homecoming and the celebration of the family reunion on Yom Kippurim. Shibolim is an exceptional term in its own right, based upon Shobel and Shibolet. It denotes an overflowing torrent that moves swiftly from one place to another in linear fashion. You can almost visualize it, can't you? From earth to heaven. It is only rendered as first fruits, branches, or grain as an extrapolation of Shibol's and Shibolet's meaning and context in which it appears. By choosing Shibolim, Yashaya is announcing that the Shabuah, Katsir, and Towrah Lakot will move a considerable number of souls very quickly and directly from Eretz to Shamayim, and that the process appears to the prophet like the flowing of a river. Oh, that's obviously very encouraging, isn't it? All of this is possible because the ultimate Zeroah, the final Zeroah, as the title is defined in the Torah, has already, well, the ultimate Zeroah anyway, the second of the three, the most important of the three, he has already done more for us than anyone in human history. That would be Dod, fulfilling Pesach, Matzah, and Bekurim. Zeroah is used in the Torah to mean sacrificial lamb. And by serving as the sacrificial lamb of Pesach and then fulfilling matzah to protect and perfect the children of Yisrael and the covenant family, the souls of Katsir and Lakot are beneficiaries of our king's achievements. And while I certainly was not in a position to appreciate the other related connotations of Zeroah when I first drafted this chapter and did not understand why it appears so prominently in this in the harvest. Well, now, having returned to this statement in Yeshaya 17, after having completed the first 3 volumes now in coming home, well, I'm at liberty to share that properly identifying the first 3 Zeroah will help lead everyone to the promised land. Moving on to the last word in Isaiah 17:5, Emek Raphaim, reveals that the Towrah Lakat will be comprised of plumbing the depths where the sick have been healed and the defective have been restored. And yet, this same Emek, depressed locale, there will be even more who are feeble and will falter because the souls of the dead will remain. Far too many will continue to be apathetic, refusing to exert the effort required to capitalize upon either the harvest or the gleaning. It is interesting that Raphaim is also the broad and open valley, which means the broad and open way of religion and politics, just 2 miles southwest of Jerusalem. Close, but not close enough. Considering the timing of this prophecy, combined with the propensity of the world to inaccurately view the Muslims living within Israel as Palestinians, Raphaim may also speak of them, especially in how it is presented in 2 Samuel 5:18 and 22. There it is portrayed as the valley in which the Philistines yet again came to spread out in a place where they did not belong. The dying souls of Raphaim are beguiled into following the broad and open way of men who are religious and political. In this regard, Raphaim is from Rapha, which reveals that those who remain depressed could otherwise have been healed by the physician, but they have to have made that choice, the appointment. This addresses the Torah's propensity to cure that which ails us when we capitalize upon its provisions. But because the faltering have rejected Yahowah's Torah, they are deprived of the restoration it provides, ensuring that their health remains unimpaired. Now, with the realization that this pronouncement from the greatest of the prophets lists the thinning of Yisrael immediately before the Shabuah harvest of standing grain, there is every reason to conclude that it will be fulfilled before the worst of the worldwide carnage begins, particularly against Israel. It also seems reasonable that the treaty alluded to in Daniel, the one which appears to usher in the beginning of the time of Jacob's troubles, that it's predicated upon Israel sacrificing land, as this prophecy predicts. It must be very similar to what they will seek to impose by resurrecting the 1967 United Nations Security Council Resolution 242, trying to reconstitute the conditions which existed before Muslims lost the Six-Day War. But of course, no one will bother to ask if the 1967 borders were so sacrosanct, they're so important, then why did Muslims fight the Six-Day War? When you make an agreement with somebody, or you choose to make an agreement, you make an offer to them. I offer to sell my home for $1. And you say, no, I'd rather fight you. Then that offer no longer exists. You can't lose the fight and then say, oh, by the way, I want to take that deal for the $1. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. It's also we're talking about in the 1948 War of Independence, where Israel was offered a state and the Muslim nations said, nope, you can't have it. We're going to kill you instead. You can't then go back and say, oh, we want that original. It's not the way it works. Unless you're a progressive and then you're stupid. Most progressives have never worked an honest day in business anyway, so they don't know what it is to make a fair and lasting deal. It's all part of the process. Israel is becoming ever more vulnerable over time, with 2 decades separating the forfeiture of Gaza, which was ceded to the Muslims on September 22nd, 2005, followed by 2 years from now by not 2 years perhaps from the time of that I last edited this, but now separated from what's imminent. And that will call for Judea and Samaria, errantly called the West Bank, to be given to the Muslims who murdered, raped, tortured, mutilated, abducted, tortured some more, gloated over, celebrated their carnage on October 7th. Also at issue is we don't know. Again, it's just showing how prophecies are fulfilled so very quickly sometimes. I had said we don't know when the Syrian war will end. Well, we do know now. It's already over. And it ended in 2024 with terrorists prevailing, just as Yahweh had foretold. And so we now know that all of the pieces that were specifically described, every detail in the prophecy, took place just as God said that it would. And now the world is prepared to give these Muslims, the Islamic State of Fakistan, the territories surrounding Jerusalem, Ramallah, Jericho, Bethlehem, Hebron, tearing Israel to pieces. On behalf of Islamic terrorists. And it's all going to happen between now and May of 2026. And then the worst of Jacob's troubles will begin. Satan incarnate will arrive. Islamic jihadists will continue to commit ruthless acts of terrorism. The next invasion of Israel will be between 100 and 1,000 times worse than what we witnessed on October 7th. All of this leading to cataclysmic war. It will lead to the deaths of more Jews than any other time. And this sad note, I will conclude this program. The good news is that while millions that's not good news that millions will die. Millions and millions are going to die. That is the consequence of what is being proposed now in the United Nations by Trump, Macron, Starmer, by the prime ministers and presidents of Canada, Spain, Portugal, Norway, France, Germany, the United States, and the dictators over the Islamic fiefdoms, particularly Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Turkey. They're all going to converge on Israel. It's going to ignite a global war, and many, many will die. But in the end, the good news is Israel will prevail. She will survive. A remnant will thrive. And we will be there in the end to celebrate the restoration of the earth back to the conditions experienced in the Garden of Eden. I hope you stay the course with us, that you make a decision to support Israel, to oppose these forces that have marshaled against her, and that we can count on you doing the right thing for the right reason, and actually saving your own soul in the process. Thank you for listening. We'll return to this program tomorrow. May God bless you all.